Thank you all for coming this morning. I'm going to turn it over to Dean Brown before I welcome you.
Well, good morning, New England Law, Boston. Time to wake up, get that coffee going, get your questions ready. First of all, thanks for joining us this morning. And I want to thank my friend Jim Braude for participating in this. Jim's a legend. Obviously, you all know him. We're going to have some fun and hopefully, just show that people who are on completely and totally different sides of the political spectrum can actually have a tremendous amount of respect for each other, have some fun, and give you some information that you may or may not know. So we're psyched. We're ready to go. So I'll turn it back. Jim, let me turn it over to you and give an introduction.
I'm thrilled to be here. I mean, I'm just thrilled. I've known you for a long time. I'm sure we're going to talk about that. I'm not upset that you didn't provide breakfast. I'll forgive you for that, but I'm happy to be here nevertheless. Good to see you.
Well, I'll be over your house in about an hour, Jim, so we better watch what you ask for, okay? So Jen, I'll turn it right back to you.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us this morning. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jen Kelly, the Chief Marketing Officer at New England Law, and I'll be moderating the event this morning. In addition to members of our community, we do have a few admitted students who are joining us today. So welcome to new members of the community. In a moment, I'll introduce Jim and Dean Brown a little more formally, but we have a short conversation discussion planned, and then we'll open it up to questions, which you can share with me via the chat. We also had some folks emailing questions. So let me start with introducing Jim Braude. I think most of you probably know Jim, but he is the host of Greater Boston, co-host of Boston Public Radio. He's worked with his co-host Marjorie Egan for 18 years, first doing a TV show together, then moving on to radio. I'm not sure if you all know, Jim is also a lawyer. During law school, he ran a small retail business in Provincetown, Help Us Break Even. He started his professional career as a legal services lawyer in the South Bronx, handling housing and prisoners' rights cases. He was the founder and first president of the National Organization of Legal Service Workers, a union representing staff in civil legal offices for the poor in 35 states. They helped lead the fight to preserve the national program when President Reagan proposed its abolition. He then served as executive director of the Tax Equity Alliance for Massachusetts, a tax reform coalition. And during that time, he led many ballot campaigns, including what would have been the largest budget cut on the ballot in US history. He published Otherwise, a magazine on American politics, and then served as a Cambridge City Councilor. Jim graduated from the University of Pennsylvania and New York University Law School, which I hope you won't hold against him. Although most of our attendees know our new dean, Scott Brown, I wanted to just say a few words of introduction for the admitted students who are joining us today. Scott Brown began serving as president, CEO, and dean of New England Law Boston on January 4th, 2021. He is the former ambassador to New Zealand and the independent state of Samoa. He brings to New England Law deep expertise in both the public and private sector with more than 30 years of public service as a diplomat, political leader, attorney, military officer, and public figure. People got to know him nationally a lot more in 2010 when he won a special election to fill the term of the late US Senator Ted Kennedy. During his tenure, he was known as the most bipartisan senator in the US. He also began his public service career as an assessor and a selectman for the town of Rentham, Massachusetts. He served as Massachusetts State Rep for the 9th Norfolk District for 7 years and the State Senator for the Norfolk, Bristol, and Middlesex District for 5. For nearly 4 decades, he served in the enlisted and officer ranks of the Massachusetts and Maryland National Guard. And during his legal career, he focused on family and probate law, all aspects of real estate law and trust and estates. And then he also worked as an attorney for Nixon Peabody, focusing on mergers and acquisitions and government relations. He earned a BA from Tufts University and a JD from Boston College Law School, which we'll also not hold against him. So thank you, everyone. We're going to kick it off. I'd love to hear how these two got to know each other. And I hope we can, Dean Brown, I hope you don't mind if I call you Scott for this.
No, please do.
And,
Jim, you can call me Mr. President, though. Jim, you can call me Mr. President.
That was my intention, so it's fine.
Let's start with Jim. Could you tell us the backstory of how you two got to know and respect one another?
Well, I don't know about the respect part. I can talk about how we got to know each other. But first of all, one correction, Jen, when you're talking about my ballot career and you mentioned the largest budget cut in US history, I opposed that. I didn't lead it. Let's be clear about that.
I didn't have enough coffee while reading your bio, so I apologize if I'm muddled.
That's perfectly all right. I thought about this in anticipation. Scott and I met when he was a legislator at the State House. And to tell the truth, I obviously felt bad for him because it was clear that he was never going to go anywhere. And so I befriended him, and on a serious note, when I met Scott Brown was a different time, when people who had different worldviews in politics didn't treat each other like crap, were not disrespectful, were not unkind. There were some exceptions, but for the most part, people were willing to listen, which I think is all you're entitled to. I was a lobbyist, by the way, I should have said, at the State House, and did some lobbying in Washington as well in years before. And I have to say, Scott was one of the people who as he said a minute ago, we disagreed on a lot of policy issues. There was never one time where he was not willing to listen, have an intelligent back and forth. Sometimes we ended up reaching the same endpoint. Most times we did not, but you never left legislator Brown, whether he was a state rep or a senator, feeling you didn't get a fair hearing. The thing that cemented our relationship, and I'm sure Scott would tell the story, so I'm going to beat him to it. In subsequent years, I got a television show at New England Cable News, NECN, and Scott was a pretty regular guest. And the thing that really solidified our relationship, we used to talk about, Scott was a great basketball player. I was a great basketball watcher. And even though I'm 6'5", that was about the extent of my skills. When I was cut from my high school basketball team, my coach, Art McNally, who was then head of NFL officials, I said, thank you, coach. I'm really surprised I made it this long. And he said, well, frankly, the coaching staff and I could not believe that somebody this big was this bad. Putting that aside for a second, we were talking about Pete Maravich, who for a lot of you probably never heard of, but a magician on the basketball court, unlike any other. Scott finished a show on NECN with me one night. I was there a couple of hours later. Who reappears about an hour later after the show's over with a VHS of Pete Maravich? He had gone home to get it, but Senator Brown, from that point forward, we were even closer than before. Is that a fair retelling of our history, Scott?
Yeah, that's your version, but yeah, I do remember that. We love Pete Maravich. We love sports, obviously, and I have found that family, food, sports, and music are the great equalizers where pretty much everyone can talk. We can talk about, the Patriots and the, Dallas, or the Red Sox and the Yankees. We'll have these amazing disagreements, but we always do it respectfully. And that's why I love those four genres. But of course, I remember all that, Jim, but the thing I remembered the most is appearing on your shows. You were respectfully the toughest, and still are one of the toughest interviewers I've ever been in front of, number one. And I always prepared. Some interviews you can just go and kind of wing it, but I've always prepared. I made sure I understood the facts, because really, we're both lawyers and we can both debate till we're blue in the face. And I'll never forget being on your show and being really nervous and doing well. And then after it was over, you said, you know what, good job. You may have a little future in this field. And from then on, obviously the basketball, and there's the constant back and forth as we're doing right now, throwing little barbs at each other and not taking it personally, because there's this underlying respect that, we don't probably agree a lot politically, but we love our families, we love our country, we love our friends, we love our jobs, we love sports. There's so much that we can find to kind of, talk about and unify with. So yeah, thanks. And thanks again for being on. This is going to be fun.
A pleasure.
Well, you both bring up a good point, and it's actually something we hear a great deal about in the classroom these days, that it's really tough to talk about really challenging issues when you have very polarizing different viewpoints in the classroom. Do you have any advice on how to respectfully debate these issues and remain friends, or at least not enemies?
Who are you talking to, Jen?
Let's go with you first.
I'm embarrassed to say that I don't have a prescription right now. I believe that Donald Trump, by the way, political polarization preceded Donald Trump, there's no question. A lot of people think it was a speech Pat Buchanan gave about the culture wars before we even heard that expression at the Republican National Convention. I think it was in 1992, and then came Newt Gingrich, and there were political wars began, the polarization began, even though nothing like now. I think that Donald Trump was the most divisive, inept, and I use this next word intentionally, homicidal president that we have ever had. And when you see what happened yesterday in Georgia, where a Republican legislature and a Republican governor signed a bill that makes it a crime to give a person who's waiting in line to vote water or food, you know that the divide is so horrible. So, I'm so glad Marjorie Egan, my radio colleague, is not listening. We've been fighting about term limits for 20 years on the radio and a little while on television. I never, ever believe them. I do believe this notion, because I think, actually, speaking of Ted Kennedy, arguably the greatest senator, maybe Daniel Webster, in the history of the Congress, and obviously he wouldn't have been had he not been there. I never supported term limits, but I have to say, if there's another year or two of this grotesque, dysfunctional partisan divide in Washington, I'm afraid the only solution may be term limiting people in Congress. And by the way, one last thing, if I may, as Joe Biden said yesterday, Congress is divided right down the middle. The American people, for the most part, are much more united. If you poll them on a whole set of issues, you will find great overlap, great consensus on many things. Unfortunately, the people we see every night on television or here on the radio are quote leaders in Washington.
Well, thank you, Jim. It's interesting. I'm a glass half full guy. I'm hopeful. I was the most bipartisan senator in the U.S. Senate, and I'm disgusted right now with what's happening politically. And I've said this publicly; it's no secret. That Ted Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, for those of you who don't know, obviously Ronald Reagan is our former president, Tip O'Neill, not Ted Kennedy. Tip O'Neill was the Speaker of the House from Massachusetts, and they were legendary icons in the Democrat and Republican fields. And by day, you would see them battling till they're blue in the face on everything. They wouldn't agree on anything. And then by night, they grab a scotch, play some cards, and actually get our country's issues resolved. And when President Reagan was shot, Tip O'Neill, was in his room and said, "Mr. President, I love you. The country loves you. Please get well soon." And that is obviously gone. And when I was there was a body of us who were so-called moderates, AKA rhinos, apparently, and blue dog Democrats, who we basically controlled the Senate in terms of the legislation. Because remember, when I was elected to fill the late Ted Kennedy's seat, I was a deciding vote on every single piece of legislation for almost a year and 3 quarters. So
by the way, Chip, let me interrupt you. That was not the late Ted Kennedy's seat. That was the people's seat. Did you ever hear that, Scott Brown? For those who didn't live through this, one would argue the most important line in the Coakley-Brown Senate race that elevated Scott Brown to the United States Senate was that immortal line when it was referred to as Ted Kennedy's seat. I'm sorry, Scott. Go ahead.
No, yeah, good on you, man. That's true. Thank you. It's the people's seat. That being said, we have an opportunity right now to work through things, and that's part of the discussion. I mean, look at us as right now in the law school, some of the things we're going through. Don't forget, we're training you to be lawyers. We're training you to be adversarial. You are adversarial. What we have to find the balance is when we're having these discussions in class, we're going to work with the professors to try to find the balance when things are getting personal. Like, okay, time out, like Jim and I are just doing, the friendly banter. It's not personal. You can have an opposing point of view, but you have to do it based on fact, doing it respectfully, knowing the limitations of our conversations and not demonizing everybody for having an opposing point of view. We're a law school. Just picture this. Picture you're up in front of the Supreme Court, okay? You have an opportunity. I'm a member of the Supreme Court. I have an opportunity to go up there and argue if I wanted to, but you're now out of New England. You're up there arguing, and Justice Kavanaugh, for those of you who are very liberal, ask you a tough question. You hate Justice Kavanaugh just based on everything that happened. And he's grilling the crap out of you. And he's like really in your face. Are you going to start yelling and screaming and basically canceling him out and walk out the courtroom? No, you're going to basically battle right back respectfully, factually. And that's what we need to kind of get back to. And that's where we're doing some training with our faculty. That's where we're doing training with ourselves with the implicit bias and World Cafe training. We have to find a way to be great lawyers and great law students and great people and give and treat each other with dignity and respect, like Jim and I do, and like many, many others do.
So Scott, I'm going to take questions at the end, but something just came up in the chat that someone submitted, which I think is interesting, kind of the flip side of what you're talking about. You know, you're talking about your viewpoints when you oppose the viewpoints of the person on the other side. Do you have any advice about what to do when you're starting a conversation and you know that this other party is hostile towards you for whatever reason? I know you've had heated political debates and you've probably been in the, you know, the Senate with someone who you know had, you know, called you a so-and-so on the news last night. How do you approach it that way without being objective when you know that they're maybe not objective towards you?
Well, I remember there's many, many, many times in the U.S. Senate, battling with Chuck Schumer, Bernie Sanders. We have absolutely nothing in common, but it never, ever got personal. We would find, as I said, that common bond, that common ground. You know, is it family? Is it music? Is it sports? And know that it was never personal. We're just very passionate about our specific issues. I mean, for example, you know, Jim and I, when, you know, like I'll say, Jim, listen, I know you're like so liberal, it's crazy, but let me just tell you, you know, my opinion. And there's that friendly back and forth. Saying he's a liberal is not an insult, but, you know, going to the extreme of, you know, Nazi, racist, fascist, using the N-word, all these other like trigger words, they shouldn't even be in our vocabulary. They really shouldn't. Jim, what do you think?
Well, you know, this may be unsatisfying to people who want to believe that everything is about policy. Human contact is a huge part of the ability. It's sort of a precedent. It comes before the ability, in my opinion, to make deals. I don't know if one of the people who spoke, I was at one of the Ted Kennedy memorials in Mission Hill. And I can't remember if he spoke there or if he said this on TV. Dan Quayle was a very conservative vice president for, obviously, for the first George Bush, former senator from Indiana. And when he was talking about Ted Kennedy, again at his memorial, he said, I never, ever, ever had a meeting with Ted Kennedy where the first thing that he brought up was not, how are your kids doing? And he knew each of my kids by name. Meaning showing you care about the human being is an icebreaker of epic proportions. So the guy who was the liberal lion of the Senate, and some people think one of the most partisan people ever, when I was working in Washington to stop the defunding of legal services for the poor, which was proposed by Ronald Reagan, he proposed full privatization. The leader of that was Ted Kennedy, but the leader was Ted Kennedy and Barney Frank in the House, who was a freshman, working with some very conservative Republicans who believed that access to justice was a critical thing. How did he break the ice with that? I saw him dealing with these people in the warmest, most personal of ways. The second thing is, you know, Barack Obama said this. I think Voltaire said it originally, I'm not sure. And I didn't used to be like this when I was younger, and frankly, even when I met Scott. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, meaning it is so much more important to try to reach some consensus and advance the goals of the people you represent and care about than staying ideologically pure to the point that there is total paralysis. That mindset has got to set in. And even though I was negative, Jen, a few minutes ago, and Scott, about, you know, the whole how do you break this logjam? If there are a few people, like Scott mentioned a minute ago, a handful on the Republican, a handful on the Democratic side, like years ago, cut a deal on immigration that fell apart. There was an attempted deal on this relief bill, which fell apart, but at least they tried. A successor to there may end up causing more of those kinds of successes to happen. So I'm not quite as hopeless as I suggested before. I just may not be as hopeful as Scott.
And if I can, Jen, if I can just add something to that. You know, Jim, you're absolutely right that Ronald Reagan rather be your 80% friend, than your 20% enemy. You're not going to get that perfect, that perfect 100% all in every single time. And as lawyers and lawyers to be, I mean, it's part of compromise. I mean, I remember when I worked on the Music Modernization Act, that the previous president signed. I started that in 2010, and the back and forth and the back and forth and the working through that is now a law. So things take time, and you have to find partners, especially if you're going to be a legislator, or if you're going to be a lawyer, if you're going to be in business, and if you're in law school, you have to. And I think that's absolutely right. I remember that about Ted Kennedy, because I served as a local legislator with Ted, and I also worked with some of the most liberal icons. And I've said this, the story about Bernie Sanders. I have nothing in common with Bernie Sanders. He makes you look like Rush Limbaugh. Okay, so, and I remember every single time we would talk in the Senate, in lunches, in dinners, in meetings, it was always, nothing in common. We always say, hey, how's Vermont doing? When he had that massive flood and people, I was the first one to reach out and say, hey, is there anything I can do? I mean, do you need any help? And it's those little things, how's the family? How's this? How's that? Is there anything we can work on? No. Okay, well, good. It's great to see you, sir.
Can I give you one very quick, Jen, local example?
Sure.
Charlie Baker is not exactly a right-wing zealot. He's a moderate Republican. But do people here remember when Gretchen Whitmer, the Democrat governor of Michigan's life was threatened by some insurrectionist nuts? One of the first people to call her was somebody who'd never spoken to her before, didn't even know her. It was Charlie Baker. And those kinds of things, I am betting that if there was something that a Governor Baker wanted from Congress in the future that Gretchen Whitmer otherwise might not support, my guess is that outreach from whatever it was, 6 or 8 months ago, might cause her to act more charitably towards the Baker goals because of his, human outreach. I'm sorry, Jen, take it away.
No, go.
No, not at all. Please do jump in anytime. So Jim, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but you probably are. Many politicians also hold law degrees. Why do you think that is?
I've thought a lot about that because almost everything I've done, I was a lawyer. I was the president of a union, as you said, that represented thousands of legal services, lawyers, secretaries, and paralegals across the country. Then came here, ran a tax reform organization. I had a magazine in the middle. But I think the answer is because law school trains you, I think more important than the substance, frankly, how to think, how to break down issues in a way that, in my opinion, is applicable in almost every facet of life. I mean, a lot of kids ask me, I'm not 100% sure I want to be a lawyer. I may want to be a lawyer, but should I go to law school if I'm not 100% there? And in every case, I've said to them, the answer is yes. Because one, if there's a chance you're going to be a lawyer, you need the degree, obviously. But two, even if you're not, it'll train you in a way of thinking and analyzing problems that, in my opinion, as I said, is applicable to absolutely every single thing one does in life. So I have not only no regrets, but I would not be doing what I'm doing were it not for having been to law school.
Well, Jim, hold on to your coffee. I'm going to agree with every single thing that Jim just said. So which is a rarity. So note this on the recording, with a little asterisk. However, I'm also going to point out that it's not required to be in public service as an attorney. The system of our government was, if you recall, in the history is to have citizens, ordinary citizens, from the farms, from the workplace, just pack up and go to DC and serve and then come home. And I agree with you, Jim. As you know, I supported clean elections in Massachusetts. I have supported term limits from day one. I believe that the ability for us to have a natural check and balance, even though, yes, I know there's the First Amendment rights and all that stuff, but people get too beholden to special interests, too beholden to this go along, get along mentality. And as a result of that, the people get frustrated that you have people there for 30, 40, 50 years, and they forget about what it's like to actually come home and represent the individuals. And therefore, as a result of that, I find that you have these issues-driven politics, immigration, guns, all these like really important and hot button issues, but they polarize our country to the point where you can just run an election and win an election, or locally, nationally, or in your state on these hot button issues, instead of finding like a way to recognize those are important, but there are also so many other important issues as well. So don't forget, you don't need to be a lawyer. You guys obviously all will be, but there's a role for that combination of law and the ordinary citizen is what kind of makes the system work a little better than many other systems throughout the world.
Thank you. Before we pivot into digging in a little bit more to law school and your legal careers, I wanted to ask Jim one other question, see if he'll answer. And I know you'll find it interesting too, Scott. But Jim, what do you think is Elizabeth Warren's next political act?
Well, I guess I would have said a bunch of years ago, if you asked me about a 70-year-old senator, maybe 71, her next act may be to stay in the United States Senate and hope that she can continue to have outsized influence on her president, which I think she does right now. However, there's a 78-year-old president of the United States. There was a former president right before this who was running for re-election at 74 and got almost, I think, whatever it was, 70 million votes. So I'm not convinced she's done. Having said that, well, I think everybody in politics, and this is not a dirty word, is about ambition. Hopefully they also want to achieve good things along the way. I think she's really happy. We just talked to her on the radio the other day about this gun paralysis. This is a day or two, or maybe a day after the murders in Colorado. And obviously Scott knows her pretty well. I think she is so into the issues and so into the possibility right now of achieving things that she believed she was unable to do that I'm not so sure she's thinking about the future. However, being 74 and running for president, or 73, whatever she'll be, is surely not a disqualifier like I would have thought it would have been even 10 years ago.
And if I may, Jen, what I'm hoping for with Elizabeth Warren is she comes and speaks to us like Jim's doing, and she's already agreed to do that. And what many of you may not know, if you didn't tune into one of our forums, is that, you would think, and Jim knows this because we've spoken, Jim, you would think that we just hate each other. And quite frankly, we did, because we spent $50 million each against each other. And then you had the outside groups demonizing us, and it took away from who we are as people until Scott Lehigh wrote an article. Jim, you remember this, 2 scorpions, a red and a blue scorpion, attacking each other. And he just highlighted after she beat me, all the things that she was still going after me, and I would go right back to her. I read it and I said, boy, do I sound like a real jerk. And that's not me. I'm a good person. I'm a hard worker, and I'm not like that. And I called her up and I said, are we done? And she goes, yeah, we're done. We're better than that. And I said, why don't we just focus on the things we agree on? Your family have veterans. I served. Let's focus on that. Let's focus on children's issues. Let's focus on our economic issues. Let's focus on the things we agree on, and then the things we don't agree on. And to the point where when she was announcing for president, she called me in New Zealand. When she was releasing her records at Harvard, Jim, she called me and told me I'm releasing my records from the ones on her history. She called me, and to the point where when I got this job at New England, when she was running for president, put out a tweet saying, congratulations, great job. You're going to do a great job. The school's lucky to have you. And then my first day on the job here, in this job, she called me, says, you good? You okay? I said, well, it's a little crazy here right now. And she said, well, I'm looking forward to coming and speaking. So if we can do it after we spent $50 million against each other, Jim, and okay, what politics is like, how demonizing and how controversial and competitive it is. I'm hopeful that we as students, faculty, staff, and just as regular people, listen, we're like a nickel, there's 2 sides to every nickel, but there's still a nickel. Okay, I've used that before, but it's so true. If we can do it, then I'm hoping that we can also do it.
So, Jim, I want to ask you a 2-part question. I talked about how you began your career in legal services with a focus on housing and prisoner rights. Right now, COVID has created tremendous challenges in those areas. And I'd love to ask you to say a few words and your thoughts on the work then and what it means today under these unbelievable circumstances. And then as a follow-up, I'd like to ask you if you have advice for our students who want to make a difference for vulnerable populations.
Well, I can start and maybe do it in reverse, Jen. If your concern is trying to help vulnerable populations, don't do it from a distance. I think the most life-changing experiences I've had in my whole life, I worked in the South Bronx, as you say, as a tenant lawyer, arguably the worst housing in America. And rather than practicing on poor people or theorizing about what poor people need from a distance, I was lucky enough to represent poor people in court, in major building organizations when the services didn't exist, and wading into that world rather than, as I say, theorizing about what's best for that world is a totally different experience. So I cannot tell you how much I would recommend to people that if they have interest in serving, as you say, vulnerable populations, this nation's poor, go do it. Don't just talk about it. It is incredibly difficult, incredibly wonderful work. And it's always been underfunded, by the way. One of the reasons I ended up going to Washington was not just because the president at the time, Ronald Reagan, was proposing replacing $300 million of lawyers, paralegals, and secretaries with privatization, but because it was not nearly enough money. You may know in this state, and I'm pretty much speaking to the students now, that while there's some wonderful legal, this is civil I'm talking about. Civil, while I was in law school, I was a student in a fabulous program where I was trying misdemeanor criminal cases. That was one of the first of those kinds of programs in the country. It was a long time ago. But they're great civil legal services offices in this state, but it may shock you, and it should if it doesn't, to know that they meet roughly 1/4 of the need that exists in this state. 3 out of 4 people who walk into a legal services office in this state who need help, whether it's in a family dispute or a housing dispute or a dispute with the government over certain benefits, are not able to get representation because it's underfunded. And in answer to your question, Jen, about how does COVID affect all this, it makes it exponentially worse, not just because of the access kinds of issues, but because we have all learned, if we didn't know before, all the inequities that existed in this society last March, pre-COVID, have been exacerbated, whether they be based upon income or race or gender. And so now more than ever, and also when this is over, it's not going to be over. The effects of this going to be felt, whether it's learning loss from a poor kid in a public school or a family that's going to be $20,000 back on their rent, where the moratorium helped them but doesn't prevent them from an obligation to pay. The need is going to be greater than ever for years after what we've lived through over the past year. So there's nothing I could urge people listening to do more than to go serve the poor. It is, as I say, a life-changing time.
Scott, do you want to follow up with some advice about how they could pursue that if they're coming to law school, or we have a few admitted students on, and for students who are currently in their first year, some advice about how they could dig in to really help?
Mark this down too, Jen. I agree with everything Jim just said.
Twice.
Yeah, twice. I actually did a lot of lawyer of the day volunteering in Middlesex, Essex, Suffolk, Barnstable, Norfolk counties, working. You just walk in I was a lawyer. You give up a day and you literally go there and represent the individuals who did not have an opportunity to have legal counsel. As a student at Tufts University, I was the deputy probation officer at the Somerville District Court in a work-study program. And here's the beauty, not only for our students who already know this, but for the admitted students who may not know that. If you have, and Jim, you may not know this, it's unique, I would argue, and I'm trying to raise money to improve and enhance it. If somebody has an interest in one of those areas, they have no money to pay them, right? So they're doing it on their own dime. Well, we have a program that if you want to do that, we give you a stipend of, I think it's $3,250 to allow you to do basically 140 hours in that, is it local housing agency? Is it a domestic violence center? Very unique. We're going to be selling some old swag, by the way. You're going to get this notice if you haven't already to actually buy that, and that money is going to that program. We also have the clinics for the students who are admitted. in-house clinics that I would argue are second to none. And I took a note down because I figured this would be a question. You can work under the supervision of a full-time clinical faculty member. I see Karen Mitchell-Lunavar is here. She's one of those hard chargers down there. You can work on off-site public interest law offices. You can, in a variety of civil matters, public interest law, lawyering process, family law, immigration, domestic violence, survivor and governmental benefits, domestic relations. These are all the areas that you can actually go and be a clinic as a 1 and 2L, which starts that kind of integration into society. I believe in helping those who are not as fortunate, God bless, as we are. And one of the things that Jim is saying, yeah, you got to go and get your hands dirty. It's not pretty. And, you got to have a very thick skin. And let's just say hypothetically, whether you're a liberal, a conservative, or black, or white, or gay, or straight, you're going into one of those situations and they're not like you. Does that mean you're not going to represent them because of some political or cultural difference? No, they're people who are hurting that need our help. So you have to kind of push our illicit bias aside and actually just do your job.
If I can, Jen, if I can say one thing, I feel bad if people are watching. I'm laughing while Scott is making this serious comment. It was not at him. The other day, and this is totally coincidental, I'm with my older daughter, who's 26 years old, and there was somebody, talk about coincidence, asking about going to law school. And this person said, so what was the most memorable experience? What's the most important thing you did when you were a legal services lawyer? And I'm waxing poetic about, just like I did a minute ago, about serving the poor and how great it is. And my kid, who's a fairly cynical kid, turns to me, she says, are you kidding me? And I said, what do you mean, honey? She says, the most important thing you ever did when you were in legal services is you were a part-time babysitter for Tupac Shakur. And it happened to be true. One of the paralegals on my team was Tupac's mother, Afeni Shakur. And as a result, when Afeni went out saving the world, which she did with brilliance that was unparalleled, she would leave a little 4-year-old boy with me who ended up growing up to be Tupac. He was Tupac. And so according to my daughter, that's the most important thing that came out of my years in legal services, not the wonderful work that I think I did. So
that's pretty cool, Jim. Pretty cool. I'm gonna have to go back and listen to his lyrics and see if you're in them.
I don't think I made it in any of the songs, but I should have actually.
Well, that's funny because I was literally going to ask you about, what the best part of your legal career was. So I guess we have that covered, or.
Well, no, it was good. The first housing court in the United States was in the South Bronx. And I have to say, I remember almost every single trial. I was trying cases a week out of law school. I shouldn't have been, but that's what legal services was like in that day. And I have to say, to this day, arguably the most important thing I ever did was representing poor people in housing. And if you said to any of my clients, would you prefer to lose the place you live or lose your freedom and even go to jail? They would say, send me to jail. My house is the most important thing to me in the world because that's where I provide for and protect my family. And the importance of that work has not been paralleled, but been surpassed by anything I've done in the decades since. So that's the answer, Jen.
And Jen, some of the highlights, I mean, I have so many, being a traditional attorney, being an elected official and having that legal background, then being a military attorney. I mean, some of the cases I did as a JAG, were just, you can't make it up. I mean, you just can't make it up. One of the things I'm most proud of is me and my team, when I worked at the Pentagon, we rewrote the sexual assault regulations as they affected the Air and Army Guard that were not only done in record time, 6 months, but are in full force and effect and fully funded and in place about 8 years later and just kicking butt and taking numbers. And my most, and I remember every case as well. And the most memorable one was one of my first divorce cases in which the woman had 4 previous attorneys and they all quit because the then husband was so violent and aggressive to them, threatening their lives and reporting them to the bar, and just total harassment. And I said, I will not leave you. And, the guy reported me to the bar. He tried to threaten me, long story short, by the time it was over, when this guy claimed he was hurt and he was insane, I was able to get the judge to convince the judge through advocacy that this guy is a liar. And the judge ordered that he get picked up by an ambulance with the police, brought to court, and we had the case. And he still tried to harass me, and I got a restraining order. I got I got some personal protection, and that I will never ever forget the hug and the tears that she gave me after it was over. And that's the beauty of the law. You can do some great things.
By the way, I think that guy's in the U.S. Senate now, Scott, if I remember correctly.
See, now, if you said that, if
Whatever.
that's a great example, folks. He's busting my chops right now, and I'm not gonna like go and punch him and hit him. I love
It's
the
true.
fact
That's why.
yeah, whatever.
So you've both talked about this a little bit throughout our conversation, how the skills you learn in law school really do help you in any aspect of life. But I'm curious if you have any specifics, and I'll start with you, Jim, about how you've used law in your different roles, even today on the media when you're having guests on. How have you used the law?
Well, first of all, I do mostly on TV. I do almost exclusively interviews. On radio, Marjorie and I do maybe 75% interviews. Some of them are light. I mean, entertainment things or that kind of thing. A lot of them are with elected officials or other leaders where you feel you have an obligation to the people listening or watching to get the facts out. And I don't know how good I am at it. I work hard at it, but I know that it is not hyperbole to say that 100% of the skill at whatever level I may bring to those interviews is a function of what I learned in law school and my 7 or 8 years being that lawyer in the South Bronx. It was a long time ago, and it may sound like an exaggeration to people watching. It is not in the slightest. Those habits you form, those skills you develop, and I was not much of a student. I was not much of a student in law school either, but I was really not much of a student in college. That's what I took away. The clinical programs were the most important to me. The things where I could actually do practice, where I could put the knowledge that I was getting at whatever level into practice. And in the, again, years since, it is central to what I do. And I don't think I'd be nearly as decent at it were it not, I know I wouldn't, were it not for that training.
Well, Jim, it's great you pointed out the clinics. We actually got the approval from our board the other night to hire some additional faculty for those needs. I see our chairwoman is actually on listening here today, so I want to thank her and the board. We got another person and a half for the clinic, which I know Karen and Russell and others and all of you listening will appreciate, so we can actually even take it to a newer level. As I said before, it's my number one priority in that clinical areas to make us really like kick butt in that area. It's so very, very important. I'll just reflect on something that I have found 2 instances. Jim, you remember this, the Patriot Stadium bill, Finneran, middle of the morning. We used to have those all night sessions. He drops, obviously representing there, drops the bill on my desk like this. And I am a lawyer. And he says, yeah, we're doing this in 4 hours. Let me know if there's a problem. I'm like, what? Well, knowing, that where I am, where the state, and I zeroed in on this one area. As a lawyer, I was able to figure out that they were going to put water and sewer lines right through this town of Walpole with no mitigation monies. And had I missed that, I would have been basically, recalled if that was appropriate. But I was able to get it, not only get the mitigation monies, but make sure it was done with no disruption to the town. And that forced them actually to do all their sewer and water needs on site by developing it there. So that was number one. That was a real important thing. The next thing is, as a U.S. ambassador, they were trying for 40 years to get what's called the Kiwi Act. It's an investment trader visa that gives them a special status with the United States. Iran had it and not New Zealand. They had it during the Shah's time, but it's still in full force and effect. And I was able to do it in 7 months and get not only this Congress that's supposedly divided, pass it unanimously, and the president who could allegedly care nothing about anything, signed it before he needed to. And that enabled us to create jobs, not only in New Zealand, but in the United States. And it was that legal background that enabled me to figure it out and then do the lobbying, actually go to Washington and actually knock on the doors of the people and say, we need this, it's important. So there's so many different facets, and Jim, so many things we've done, and every other person who's on here, professor and others, that there's so many opportunities, whether you're just going to do it your own lease, or your daughter says, hey, I have a contract for employment, or you have an entertainment contract for a band. There's so many different things you can do with it.
So before I open it up to some questions, I have a ton of questions that have been submitted. I want to ask you both another two-part question. Jim, I'll let you kick it off, but I want to ask you, what's one thing you know now that you wish you could go back and tell yourself when you were starting law school and when you were starting your legal career? What do you wish what advice could you give?
Well, I think I already said it, Jen. I think that slogan that Obama used a lot, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Let me be clear. I believe in compromise. I don't believe in unprincipled compromise. And I sort of, maybe I can parrot what Joe Biden said at his press conference yesterday when people are saying, you said you're going to be bipartisan, you didn't get one Republican vote. If I were president of the United States, God forbid, for the people, not for me, that was not compromise. That was capitulation of and surrender of principle. However, the ability to move forward, even if imperfectly, rather than to be locked in place, rather than, as long as you're not violating principles that matter to you, because it's really hard to sleep and live when you know you've done things that aren't in line with the things that are at your core. That's probably the most important thing I wish I had brought along the journey with me, but I'm trying to integrate it into my work and in this part of my life. So I think that's probably the most important thing.
You know, I'm not sure what I'd change, but I think upon reflection, I think it was important. I wanted to be a lawyer down in Wall Street, a big financial guy, making zillions of dollars. And I ended up going into private practice and doing the things, divorces and real estate. And I was able to, help with the kids. My wife, Gail, Jim, as you know, was listening as well. She would get up at like 3:30 3:30 in the morning every day. So I was responsible for, feeding the kids, dressing them, which is a whole story. You should see the pictures from back then. I say, okay, let's do your hair. I'd pick them, put them over, do it up. Okay, good. You're good to go. And so we had that balance of family and work. And so I had a different lifestyle in the beginning, but I think it's important for everyone to keep an open mind about your options. I hear a lot of admitted and other students, well, I want to be an entertainment lawyer. I want to be this. And by doing something, going to one of our clinics, volunteering at a particular group, an NGO or nonprofit or some other entity, you have to keep an open mind and don't pigeonhole yourself to eliminate opportunities moving forward.
Jen, if I may, Scott doesn't need this, but I'll add it anyway, and we touch on it. I was not aware of your focus on clinical programs. I'd urge any student in this school or any other, if you have an opportunity to supplement your book learning with real world experience before you do enter the real world, assuming you're going to be a lawyer or whatever you're going to be, there's no greater believer in the value of clinical education than me, and it sounds like you.
Well, thank you, Jim. I see Russell's on, and I know that he'll appreciate those kind words. And
Huge.
I've told him and Karen and others down there that, and even the chairwoman of the board, this is a priority. This is a real asset of our school that we can showcase and highlight and give our students a top-notch, real world education. So thank you for supporting that. I'll get the solicitation in the mail to you actually tomorrow.
And be sure to, Jim, refer the person who is interested in law school to New England Law. So.
Right.
Got to put that plug in there. But now I'm going to open it up to some questions. I'm getting a ton of questions. We're not going to be able to get through them all. So we might have to have a follow-up with you at some point. But we've talked a lot at the school and in the media, and you've both discussed it today. We're all in an almost adversarial mindset these days. And then here we are in a law school. Do you think that being in the legal profession puts people in this mindset where everyone may disagree and they want to argue, have more of a propensity to argue?
I'll take this one first since you're giving preferential treatment all day to Jim. So yeah, listen, of course, we're lawyers. We want to win, and not only that, I'm a type A, Jim is a type A. We're all probably pretty type A people. We all want to win at all costs. Well, it's interesting. I've seen a lot of questions and comments from our students since I've been there about, we get off track and we focus on little things. And why should we bring race in? Why shouldn't we bring race into the equation in our studying? Well, because when you're taking the bar, for example, somebody will say, well, what good does race have to do with passing the bar? Well, believe it or not, things are changing. And when you're doing your essays and you say, they have the main question, and then there's a lot of sub issues as you learn to pass the bar, you'll learn. And if you're hitting on those race issues that need to be considered as well, because we're in a changing, so you're going to get a little quarter point. So I think that's why we're integrating these topics that are real and relevant. But more importantly, we have, we're adversarials, but you will lose respect with your peers, your friends, your colleagues. And last night we did an admitted students event from DC, and one of the alumni said, you know what, we look at obviously LSAT scores and GPA, but we look at interviewing skills, and we can tell within seconds whether somebody is full of crap. And we want people that we want to have and enjoy working with that are not always, so stuck in their positions that they can't, have a debate and then go out and get a cup of coffee or have fun at a social event without always constantly, in your face. So there's a certain amount of tolerance and acceptance. And one of the things that John Lang said the other night in our training is that, you need to get to know each other. And COVID has been a problem, guys. We know that. All right. But when we get back, we need to find out, because some of us have no clue what it's like to be on the other side of the aisle. I made a point to find out what Jim's strengths are. And, one of them was sports. And we immediately hit it off because we love sports and we love Pete Maravich. And that was the basis, as Jim said, for our relationship building and blossoming. So there's got to find something. We got to step outside our comfort zones and kind of get to know each other a little bit more. So that's it.
I'll pass. Let's go to the next question, Jim.
Yeah.
Great. I'm going to ask a fun question, a little bit of light one. I don't know if you recall this from your law school days, Jim, but if someone enjoys a lot of travel, what type of law would you recommend they go into?
Well, I'm not sure that's for me either. I traveled all the way from Greenwich Village to the South Bronx, which is about 20 minutes on a subway. So I'm not sure that's
I know that one.
My area of expertise. Scott, you want to take it?
Yeah, well, Jim, I know it's been your last century when you were in law school, so you got to think back. You got to think back to that. But
literally and figuratively.
Yeah, I would suggest working for the State Department. You're going to have some great opportunities to travel there. Either as an attorney and also as a JAG. We had one of our alum who's a one-star general on last night from DC. She has traveled all over the world and immediately coming out of law school went right into the courtroom and is now a one-star general leading a team. A lot of the governmental entities, listen, let's be real, the FBI, the CIA, the State Department, the Patent and Trade Office, there's all the government agencies, the lawyers do a tremendous amount of traveling.
Well, one other possibility, Jen, now that I heard Scott speak, is you can be an election lawyer. And since there are 43 states trying to suppress votes, you have 43 states where you can go. I'm being facetious.
Jim, you're listen, we have an adjunct coming in next semester talking about election law, and he does those exact things to make sure you protect the integrity of the vote and also dealing with any FEC violations. This is real. You're absolutely right.
Jim, other than Scott Brown, who have been some of your favorite people to have on the show and your favorite interviews over the years?
Well, I have to say there was not even a close second. About 6 months before, we still do an Ask the Governor thing. We've been doing it. Started with the first month of Deval Patrick, continued through Charlie Baker. Baker missed a few months because of COVID, but essentially every month we've had the governor on. But the most fun thing ever was there were 6 months left to go in Deval Patrick's term, and I called somebody who, well, actually people know who he is, John Walsh, who was head of the Democratic Party in the state. He's now the chief of staff in Washington for Ed Markey, Ren Markey's campaign, and said, do you think there's any way in the world we could get Barack Obama to call in for Governor Patrick's last show? And he said, I'll give it a shot. And I would ask every month, never got anywhere. A day before Deval Patrick's last show, we get a call from the White House saying that President Obama is available. So we're talking to Deval Patrick and we say, Jane from Quincy, you're on the line, John from whatever, Barry from Somerville.
I
He lived
remember
in
that.
Somerville when he was at Harvard Law School. Barry from Somerville, you're on with Deval Patrick. And President Obama starts speaking. And by the way, you can get this on the video of it is on YouTube. It's unbelievable. Deval Patrick thought it was an imitator. And until about 2 minutes in, and the one line I will never forget, Marjorie and I really shut up, which is a rarity for me at least, because this was this beautiful 6 or 7 minutes between two men who had colossal respect for each other. And at one point, there was a silence, and Barack Obama said to Governor Patrick, "You done good, Deval." And it was one of these moments between men who had deep affection for each other. It was as spectacular. So that was my favorite moment in the 20 years I've been doing this. And I don't think, frankly, that'll ever be passed. Other than, as you said, some of the star appearances by Scott Brown are so memorable and so numerous that actually I don't even know if I can list them all here today.
Oh, well, I'll list them for you. I have them all saved. But if I could, I'm not in terms of interviewing, even though, as when I was with Fox, I did a tremendous amount of interviewing of people, but probably my most memorable relationship was that with the late Senator John McCain. He was a mentor, a friend, just somebody that he took me under his wing from day one. When I was running for the so-called Kennedy seat, the people's seat, no one would even see me in DC, and he let me in only because of my military service. He said, so Senator, tell me how many points you're down. I said, Senator, I'm only down 41 points, but I'm going to win this thing. And he goes, I'm sorry, did you say 41 points? I go, yeah, I'm down 41 points, but I'm telling you, I'm going to win. And I says, how are you going to do that? I said, well, sir, first of all, you're going to max out in your donations and you're going to do an endorsement phone call for me and I'm going to win. And he goes, all right, I think you're nuts. You're from Massachusetts, you're a Republican, and you're never going to win. And he did, and then I won, and the rest is history.
Can I say one thing about that, Jen, which I didn't think about? I had the good fortune, I may get the year wrong, but I was 2 days in a row at NECN, I got to interview for an hour John McCain for one day. I had barely a relationship with him, unlike Scott did. Subsequent years. And then the next day, Senator Joe Biden, who was also running for his nomination of his party, an hour with Joe Biden too. Doesn't matter whether you agree with McCain's politics or with Biden's politics, talking about the issue that's been central to this hour, sort of treating people like human beings, trying to work together. I have never spent 2 hours with two people more concerned about their country, their fellow Americans, people in need, vulnerable parts of the population, two of the most decent, honorable, down-to-earth souls I have ever met in my whole life. I'm so glad you brought up Senator McCain. The two of them were, in my estimation, the essence of what public service should be all about, and maybe someday it will be again.
Well, I'm hopeful. Joe Biden swore me in as a senator. He was the vice president. And, obviously I've been to his house, I've had beers with him. So, certainly have a relationship there. Go ahead, Jen, what's up?
So we're getting tight on time, running out of time, and there's so many good questions here. I'm going to ask 2 more questions and then we'll wrap it up. And Jim, you're going to have to come back every Friday, I think.
Jen, excuse me. Jen's going to teach a course. I forget it. I'm already working. I already got it right here. Guys, would you raise your hand if you'd like Jim to teach a course in the summer or fall? There you go. You're in, baby. You're in. Look at that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Jen. Thank you, everybody.
Here's a question from the chat. I'm also curious if either host could speak to what unity looks like when you're talking about fundamental human rights. Is it really ideal to meet in the middle between acknowledging individuals and protecting those human rights? My chat scrolled up too fast, so I paraphrased the end there, but I'd love to hear your thoughts, Jim.
Well, I think I spoke to it before. I am a believer in compromise to get things done. I am not a believer in compromise when it comes to principle. And human rights issues are, in my estimation, ones where there is not room for compromise. There are protection of rights, and whether it be voting rights and HR and Senate 1 that would override what 43 states are trying to do, particularly to people of color, to voters of color. I actually consider common sense gun reform to be in the same category. So whoever that wrote that, I could not agree more. Those are the areas where you have to stick to what your core beliefs are. And so he or she said it perfectly.
Yeah, I agree a lot with Jim, what he said. Being a former ambassador, I dealt with, the human rights as with the Chinese Communist Party and what they're doing with the Uyghurs, the censorship, the putting people in reconditioning camps, a lot of what we're seeing in Myanmar, a lot of those human rights. I'm deeply concerned about what's going on outside of our country as well, and did a lot of work on those issues of human, drug, and child trafficking, especially the child trafficking portion, and the horrendous things that are happening in those areas. I believe, the ability to, stay alive is a human right, and the ability to, live free and enjoy your family and your livelihood is a human right. So I agree with what Jim said on the principles part, and we have to find a way to figure it out, because I reflect a lot being a former ambassador and now being a diplomat versus a politician. I would argue there's so many things going on outside our country right now, these existential threats. For example, you saw Russia and the Chinese Communist Party getting together. They're saying we're going to go against the United States. We have all these economic challenges with our debt and deficit. There's so many massive things happening outside our country, and we can't even find. Do we wear a mask or not? It's like, hello, guys.
Yes. Next.
Yeah, figure it out. So we got to deal with these big threats as well. We can't just focus on our parochial issues. So go ahead, Jen.
So we are definitely over on time, and I know Jim has a busy day ahead. So I'd love to turn it over to both of you to say one final word. Jim, any parting words of wisdom?
Yeah, as long as the check precedes the appointment to the adjunct status, I am happy to. No, I'm kidding. I really
donate that check to it's New England Law Boston. Okay.
Thank you. No, I meant in this direction, not in that direction.
Good on you, Jen.
I really enjoyed this. I am happy to do it anytime. I have known Scott Brown for a long time. I have, as he said, we're not quite different genetic species, but we have different worldviews. And I have great respect for him. I think you're lucky to have him at your school. You're really lucky to have him. And I was lucky to spend an hour with all of you today. So I hope you'll invite me back again. Jen, Scott, and all of you. Thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And Jen, thank you for doing this. And everybody who got up today, I hope it's a great way to start your day. We have people, I see people here from all different cultural, political, backgrounds, admitted, present, 1, 2, 3 L's, faculty, staff, board of directors. Jim, listen, how I feel about you. I don't want to be at a big love fest, but I'm deeply appreciative of your honesty, your candor, your friendship, and I'm not kidding, man. We'd love to have you come and teach a course at some point. We'll pay you a little bit of what you're worth. So, and listen, God bless, and everyone have a great time. I know I have to reach out to some of you who sent me some emails. You can get those questions to us if you want, Jen, and we'll try to maybe filter them out. We can, work them into our forums in the future. You guys continue to study and work hard. Cheers.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jim.